What does it actually be like when I work at They're like a girl or a school? Yeah, school. Even though the school there's like only 5 people. That's all good.
Me too.
I've never been involved. I usually go to that. Shit.
No, I think it's like if you're interested in like doing like water and it's your first time, it's like kind of a rule that it's like how to perform your first time, but if you're just there like new experience.
Coaching? Like what? Like you just dress? They didn't give you an outfit, or you just come
You
dressed?
can come dressed and then
And just like what?
or
Put on the walkway or something?
yeah, or you don't have to come dressed. You can get dressed by your walk.
I've never but I
And
can
if you
try.
want to do it, then it's fine. Pardon? No, they'd be like, who are those white kids?
White kids.
Huh? Oh, sticking too much like mainstream You did? Yes.
I did, yeah.
What did you think of it?
I liked it. It was like I like the colors of it. It was like really was it called 70s?
Yeah, like the neon prong.
Yeah. And then like the whole thing like I thought everything was like interactive because every time I clicked on something it sparkled. I was like, hey, they just like everything sparkled. Have you played the boys yet?
Yeah.
It's pretty fun though. Yeah. It's like how would you describe it?
Yeah. You're talking about like love industries as well.
The only thing that I was like, oh dang, was like you can only play one character, like one thing. Like even if you click on the other three options, you still get the same piece of music. Dang, like if you could do
Yeah, I
like,
think he's planning to expand it a project.
yeah, it's a good proof though.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet you're like more of an should do it for
You should do like tenderized meat, like
salt.
salt.
My talk? I think it's okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
You want to sign here to do something. Wow, like in here.
Is that like survey that you sent
Just for the
something?
don't be offended or passive.
Yeah.
No, that's something else.
Yeah.
It's great. That's
I'm basically
great. You're here, but like,
like, I'm basically clearing up a bunch of shit because whenever
yeah.
and I feel like so
It's
like,
encompasses all different, right? It's not just like
yeah, see, I'm gonna be hands
Okay.
I'm just gonna be like proposing terminology that the book is starting at and stuff like
Oh yeah, okay.
okay. And then also like look at the things that
You're gonna find out.
yeah. Man. even after I
Make sure you don't want to grab
I
it.
get
Snap.
so I sterilize my mom a little bit. Yeah.
It's from the stick place. Oh, right. Is this where it's supposed to be?
You're in this is the camera.
I was thinking for the whole creation of this trip, I should like.
Awesome, so make it tonic.
Yeah.
But yeah,
How's it make me feel like that? Figure out what's the I'll be on the subway like.
yeah, there's
Not as interchangeable instead of
Hopefully it means more. Some more interesting syllables.
Here's an idea. Small solutions as proxies. A lot of them. He's doing you actually see a little bit of progress.
Better.
I
mean, but yeah. At this point, I don't even
Really? I don't know. I never hear what you say in the camp, but it's like the guys.
Yeah.
Oh, God, yeah, of course.
yeah, it's launch projects. Just like but it's not gonna actually be I do. I have to find
Man, I wish you wouldn't
Is that cinnamon sticker? It's a barrel sticker, isn't it?
Which one?
Barrel.
I don't know.
It just resembles her from Sailor Moon. It's too awesome.
Oh, yes. Yeah. It's by Stella Starchild.
Nice to meet you. I'm Paolino. Nice to meet you. So I was wondering for the presentations, I don't have like a presentation for that we look like such a
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't here in this room before. Were people standing up here? That seems to be like what it's set up.
Yeah, like they were setting up there, but they were standing in front of the podium, but they had like, actually no, there was one person behind the podium. The other person had like a tablet that they were using.
But you can set up our yeah.
I can move if you want. If this is like prime real estate, I can move.
I think it's over here.
Yeah, you sure?
I was actually trying to explain this to my friend in the car on the drive here. Yeah. No, it's not.
I was like, maybe I could find some key reaction there.
It's like a frequency or something, it triggers something in your brain that's going
Yeah, it's really funny because like trying to explain it to someone.
And if it's in
Yeah,
yeah, there is. Yeah, that's fine.
other people.
Yeah.
My friend in that watching. And I was driving and I started
I think this is set up to view us here.
Okay, so
Really shot there. I'm gonna go.
You have 15 minutes.
No, that's worse.
15 minutes.
Oh, we start now.
Yeah.
You have 15 minutes to talk.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you ready?
Yeah, I don't wanna get
I'm ready.
All right. Hello, everybody. We're going to start with our Affective play track. So today we have 3 awesome presenters, and they're going to be talking about different things, and we'll have a Q&A after. So first up, we have Jessica Moore. Jessica comes from a research background focusing on identity in video games. She started making games in 2015 as a method of interrogating her relationship to the genre as a femme, a critic, and a gamer. She has been supported throughout the process by Perils, an exceptional community of game developers promoting women and gender diversity in game development in Montreal. When she's not doing games, she's cooking, caring for foster kitties, and staying active in her local community. So, round of applause.
Yeah. Hi, folks. So, I think I'm gonna. Yeah. Hello. I don't have slides or anything. I'm not really good with technology. So, bear with me. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah? People in the back? A little bit louder? All right. So, about me. I used to study games through a philosophy department, which is not a good place to study games. I do not recommend. I also gamed full-time. I did progression rating for a popular MMO, like 40 hours a week, in a really big guild. I stopped doing that in 2011. 2011 was like a bad year for games. And it was a tough one personally. I wanted to drop my identity as a gamer, so I moved across the country. I became a personal chef, and I stayed as far away from games as possible. I didn't play them, I didn't read about them. Yeah, so last year, a series of coincidences led to me being in a place where I felt emotionally safe and ready to try playing games again. At the same time, I heard about Perils, which is a great organization in Montreal that focuses on providing game-making resources for women and other non-dudes. So I started going to their workshops. I learned a bunch of things, went to a game jam, hung out in Blanket Fort, and participated in their writing incubator for all along. I'm now making little arty games. One is an ASMR audio-based cuddling simulator. And another one is called Rosewater. It's like a queer femme retelling of Hansel and Gretel, where the witch is a savior who transforms Gretel in unexpected ways. Outside of games, I also do art stuff, and I follow along in a bunch of queer and feminist arts community events based in Montreal, but I'm not central to any of them. I don't lead anything. I don't produce a lot of work publicly. Yeah, I'm just sort of situated in the peripheries of a lot of things, but one place where everything overlaps is with regards to inclusiveness for femmes and queers. So the things that I have noticed that I want to talk about today have to do with femme gender and queerness, and how games communities and femmes can help each other out. So first of all, to clarify terminology, there hasn't been a lot of research on femmes that have been inclusive of all different kinds of self-identified femmes. They've been studied primarily in the context of butch-femme dichotomies, which we're all familiar with, yeah? One paper that tries to address the femme question directly outside of this dichotomy, the authors Karen Blair and Ria Ashley Hoskins say, femmes who were not seen as being part of a butch-femme relationship or community were questioned with respect to the authenticity of their sexual identities. Questions of authenticity for femme-identified queer women are often associated with issues of invisibility. If one cannot be visibly identified as a queer woman, then their sexual identity is called into question. While other researchers acknowledge that femmes exist, they've also suggested that femmes might present femininely as a means of passing, or perhaps remaining within the closet. So as you can begin to see here, invisibility and gatekeeping are big issues for femmes. I definitely don't want to play gatekeeper here, but I'm going to narrow down what we're looking at so that we can have a conversation. So I'm just going to say that self-identified femmes are people who subvert traditional femininity in resistance to heteropatriarchy. And yeah, I'm just going to say that, and I might be wrong. So femme can be a gender expression or a gender identity. It is usually, but not necessarily, queer. You can't identify a femme by looking at one. Not all feminine people or people read as feminine are femme. Femmes can be genderqueer, non-binary, men, trans, or gender void. How people experience overt oppression and violence as femmes will depend on how their presentation matches social expectations, as well as how their race, ability, and class intersect with their gender. So there's no unified femme experience, just a cluster of femme experiences that together form a sort of gestalt of femmes. So when I'm talking about femmes in broad sweeping terms, bear this in mind. Bear in mind that invisibility is an issue that femmes face, and here my goal is to just talk about my perspective and my experiences in order to increase visibility and hopefully encourage further research that is sensitive to these issues. So, what is femmephobia? If you know about misogyny, you probably know about femmephobia, at least in part. In the study above, the authors describe it as a type of prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism that is directed at someone who's perceived to identify, embody, or express femininely, or towards people or objects gendered femininely. So that's a lot of things. But yeah, what the important part to understand is that femmephobia is everywhere in both queer and straight communities. It is not something that queer people are immune to having, or that feminists are immune to having. You can have internalized femmephobia. Most people do. Yes. So femmephobia is often systemically and structurally enforced in institutions that have power structures, such as academic institutions, game-making communities, and the games industry. It's everywhere, and I'm not going to ring it out all the ways that femmephobia is present in games, because I think we all know this. If you don't, you can ask me after. But what I do want to note is that femmephobia doesn't just show up in the narrative content in games. It can be embedded in game design, marketing decisions, hiring practices, workplace cultures. Games invite us to imagine amazing, fantastical worlds, but even our imaginings are situated in bodies, which are themselves situated in cultures, which are themselves situated in specific socio-political contexts. We cannot escape that. So androcentrism, femmephobia, invisibility, community exclusion, and violence are things that femmes face. They pose real risks to joining digital art and game communities. S.E. Smith in Beyond the Binary, Yes, Binary Femmes Exist, writes, "It can be incredibly stressful to live, move, and act on the margins of a society that repeatedly tells you that you don't exist, and repeatedly erases your identity. Femmes sometimes evade these risks by failing to be true to their gender, by passing as traditionally feminine, perhaps, or by acting more butch or less bi. In my experience, when I was raiding full-time, I was playing with mostly older dudes, many of whom were current or ex-military, disabled, poor, black, or neurodivergent. Femmephobia was rampant, and it was an important part of how the team bonded together. It was made very clear from the beginning that I was only welcome if I knew my place. This showed up in all the usual ways, tits or GTFO, everything. And I thought that I was strong enough to handle because it was just online, and it was just in my spare time. And for a long time I was. I played the part of a traditionally feminine person, enduring abuses and insults with smiles and evasions. and that earns me the right to contribute to the team. These and similar evasions are coping methods that femmes use to deal with femmephobia. They often comprise a bunch of shitty bargains that femmes shouldn't have to make. And these bargains are viewed by queer and trans communities often as a privilege. Passing privilege, however, is a misleading term. Yes, we pass, but only through fear and threats of violence. When we speak our truths, we are silenced and threatened and attacked. Being a femme and being overtly feminist is perilous to your mental and physical safety. Clementine Morrigan writes in Femme is Defiance, "This femme embodiment is a hard-won confidence, a willing to face down sexual violence every single day." So, the interesting part for me is that both femme identity and its precarious position in a hostile culture equips femmes with skills that make them useful to the very communities that reject them. It takes incredible strength to remain soft in the face of constant effacement, denigration, and violence. This strength equips femmes with special affective talents. Femmes' unique sensitivity and receptiveness, communication skills, and softness equip them with the ability to guide others in navigating hostile terrain. Their fierce defense of vulnerable people helps to hold communities accountable for their actions. They take care, and everyone benefits from that emotional labor. Vanessa Shanti Fernanda writes, "Although femmes define themselves as active agents, they are nevertheless rendered invisible, as the queer and straight communities often perceive them to be heterosexual. The femmes' learned talents of receptivity, vulnerability, openness, and communication require strength and active participation. However, members of the queer community do not always recognize or appreciate these talents." In the guild that I was in, I was often called on to guide people who were having difficulty with their role because I had the patience to deal with them kindly. I would smooth over arguments between guildmates. My ability to diffuse tension with diversions was called on all the time. I would anticipate people's needs and help communicate them. My heightened sensitivity and awareness of other people's emotional state and my skills at navigating that tense and difficult terrain to help us achieve our goals were skills that I learned out of necessity as a femme trying to be who she is in a hostile world. I find it interesting that the very qualities that allowed my guild to succeed arose from my ability to adapt to the violence enacted on my gender by that same guild. Artist Laura Mathis invites us to consider radical softness as a weapon. Being soft in a hostile world is a radical act, but one that often comes at a very high personal cost. So what I want to ask is, how can communities learn from the special talents of femmes and adapt to their needs? How can digital game communities embrace and nurture femmes? So to respond to this, I'm going to look a little bit closer at art stuff. Chantal Lefebvre curates a series of communities online whose strict enforcement of safer space guidelines enables them to be safe spaces for femmes. By enforcing high standards of sensitivity and care, these spaces become communities enriched for all members. Her approach stems from her experience with the perils of being a femme online in the arts community. Working primarily in collage and glitch art as ways to explore and heal from her experiences as a femme in a hostile world, she has faced further abuse in online communities. Places that purportedly exist to support artists were often supportive only of certain kinds of artists who produce certain kinds of work. Creating and nurturing her own communities is a proactive response to this treatment. Some communities are specifically for femmes, such as the Soft Femme Collective, while others have distinct femme leanings like Self-Soothe, a curated collection of soft, soothing gifts and images, often in pastel shades or featuring feminine themes. Others, such as What Did You See on the Street Today, which you may have heard of, are open communities for everyone, but still hold the same high standards for commenting and safer safe policies. But these latter types of group require significantly more emotional labor and moderation. The benefit is that it's safer for people who are disproportionately targeted with violence offline, and it teaches relatively privileged people the importance of these guidelines. Creating spaces that are safe for artists and game makers requires a similar set of prerequisites. At Perils and the Montreal Game Society, safer space policies are always explained at the beginning of every single session. It's never taken for granted that people know what they are. Meetings are sometimes held in the daytime, or children are welcome, or sometimes they have social meetings without alcohol. Often Perils meetings will have blanket forts, chill-out zones for people to take a break from loud, intense social interaction. These little things may seem silly to you, and if they do, say hello to your femmephobia. These things make it easier for femmes, especially softer femmes, to be who they are without having to make the same shitty bargains. They spare us immense emotional labor, and that is the key. Playing and making digital games as a femme is already a radical act, for we are everywhere cut out, undervalued, and denigrated across all levels of game culture, industry, and sometimes even scholarship. Learning from community organizations that are explicitly femme-friendly, we can create spaces that operate better and are safer for everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
That was so great. Again, we're going to have Q&A at the end, so if you have questions, keep track of them, write them down, whatever you got to do. So we're going to set up for our next presenter. So just give us a minute. Do you want to use my computer?
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
I might shift the podium a little.
Yeah, do anything. And I realized that my bag is like there's no text person.
Footstool. Okay.
Are one of the NYU tech people in here? I don't know if there should be a tech person. Okay. Can you turn on the projector?
The actual editing tab, but I can bring one here. This doesn't and is your no.
All right, so while we're setting up, I'll read our bio.
Can you get that projector?
So, Paolino Caputo is a student researcher, contemporary artist, queer activist, game designer, and a role-playing enthusiast. He's been selected as the recent recipient of the Undergraduate Research Experience Award Program. He is fascinated by new media and intermedia contemporary art practices, including performance art and conceptualism. He thematically employs intimacy, vulnerability, and discomfort in his works as catalysts for personal growth and social change. One day he plans to marry Sothe, become Viennetta, and adopt too many cats. He is currently working towards his Bachelor of Fine Arts at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops, British Columbia. No luck yet.
Not yet. No.
Should be doing it. Sorry about this, guys.
Jess, do you want to take a question while we're reading? Do you mind?
Sure.
Don't put you on the spot. Do we have any questions for Jess? I thought it was such an inspiring talk, really. I almost cried a bit. I don't want to get too
me
into
too.
it. Yeah, I think it's really interesting of you know, staying soft and being strong. That like things that we think are very different, but actually can be one thing, and how we can take that up. And so you've taken it up in both in community spaces and ways of playing games. What about like femme aesthetics? Like I think that has become like a pretty popular thing now, like hyper femme. What do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, there's actually a really cool artist called Satypins, and you can find them on Tumblr, Satypins with a Z. They do things like make really cute teddy bears with knives, and like soft, pink, feminine-looking dolls will cut you. And I think that one of the ways that like femmes subvert gender is by taking things that are associated with weakness and specifically using them violently. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, and this, I think it sort of goes contrary to people's presumptions that the feminine people don't like violence in games. Feminine people I know really like killing people in games. We also like spending 3 hours coming up with character names, or grinding, you know, things endlessly so you can get the really cute companion pets, and then take special pleasure in letting people die when they don't step out of the fire. The two things can go hand in hand, and I think that sort of underscores the keynote that took place yesterday, where they were basically talking about how all these things that we think we know about, you know, gender difference research should be complicated. As in, like, we shouldn't take it as given, we should complicate it. Yeah, and I think that if you look at femme-specific femme-gendered, like, choices and expression, you might create more nuance. Is it working now?
Well, now we're searching to get onto this NYU guest, but I got a hot tip that the Wi-Fi was being kind of wacky, so I don't know what to do.
I probably, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I have an offline copy of it anyway.
And Nicole too, you'll be using the...
I didn't turn on like a hotspot. I have like an inordinate amount of roam mobility data.
Okay.
Till like 12:30 tomorrow.
Nicole, you're doing yours off of this computer, and are you? No, that's what I'm asking.
Oh, I was going to do it on this, but I
Okay.
think that's easier there.
No, let's switch it now, because if you don't need the internet, we can fix this while you present.
Okay.
Yeah, let's switch it up.
Anyway, I turned on a hotspot. You should be able to find it. Called like the speakeasy.
Sorry for all these technical difficulties.
Oh.
Are we switching presentations right
Yeah,
now?
let's switch.
Okay,
We can do it all.
if not, then are you just flipping your screen to drive?
Come up.
Yeah, we'll just.
Oh my god. Okay.
Ah.
Oh, go away.
Sorry,
Sorry.
Okay. Now my camera.
Come back, go away, come back, go away.
Okay. Right. So when I was a little boy, I used to spend a lot of time with my younger siblings at my grandmother's house. Now, if any of you know any Italian families, you probably realize that means spending a lot of time in a small space with a lot of people. My grandmother alone had her 2 sons, 2 daughters, and her husband all living under the same roof, all adults. Needless to say, it was pretty easy to keep us entertained. We spent a lot of time with my aunts, and we used to go downstairs and play the original Mario Party on the N64. For those of you who don't know, Mario Party, you get to play as one of 6 iconic characters from the Mushroom Kingdom, and you run around a board, play mini games, collect coins. You try and be the one with the most power stars at the end of the game. My aunts, when we played, they would always ditch Yoshi, because Yoshi's the adorable little dinosaur who doesn't love him. My little brother would pick Mario because he's got the heroic qualities that he really identified with. Sometimes I would pick Luigi because Luigi's got the brotherly dynamic going on with Mario. But more often than not, I would actually pick Princess Peach. So, as you probably all know, Princess Peach, being the kind and benevolent princess from the Mushroom Kingdom, she is also constantly getting kidnapped by Bowser and is one of the originators of the damsel in distress trope that we see so often in games nowadays. But despite that being said, I really kicked ass as Princess Peach. Whether it was Bumper Balls or Platform Peril, I was always the one to finish first, collect the most coins, beat the game before everyone else. But despite this, I didn't really know or acknowledge at the time that it might be a little bit weird for a little 6-year-old to be playing a princess. It might be unusual. But my family was fine with it, but I was still kind of figuring myself out. It didn't stop at Princess Peach, though. As I moved into other games and expanded my collection, I found myself really drawn to these feminine figures. What about them compelled me? Something about them made them intriguing, made me identify with them more than I identified with any type of male character, and it kind of baffled me. I originally just attributed it to a general rejection of masculinity. I have this deep ingrained fear of being typical in some way, and so throughout my life I always tried to step outside of the normal box. So I thought that when I didn't pick Ryu with the big muscles and punching everyone in the face, I thought it was just because I wanted to be different, and that picking Chun-Li somehow made me unique. But even beyond video games, this occurred. As I entered into an art practice after my high school experience, I found myself genuinely influenced by these female artists, whether it's Maria Abramovich, Sophie Calais, or Janet Cardiff. All of these women were significantly impacting the way I made art and the direction that I was heading in my future. And this began to really bother me. I mean, what about women did I find so appealing? And I felt like there was something about it that I wanted to co-opt for myself. But what was it? Well, after some more time spent playing games, as I do a lot, I found Bayonetta. So, Bayonetta being one of my favorite characters of all time, she is the Umbran witch who slows time, shoots 4 pistols, 2 from her hands and 2 from her feet. She shoots the latter, nobody really knows. And she does all the things your regular hero would do, like summoning demons and killing angels and saving the world. But the catch with her is that she's incredibly sexy. Whether it's her outfit, which is composed entirely of her hair and flies off casually as she casts her spells, or whether it's the little lollipop that she slips between her breasts when she's not using it, everything about her has this hormone-inducing appeal that really intrigued me for some reason. I found myself going crazy over it, and I could spend this entire talk talking about how I think Bayonetta kind of transcends the limits of the femme fatale trope and offers an interesting commentary and should be a key part of feminist literature in gaming. But I'm just going to gloss right over that and just highlight the fact that she drove me insane. I really love Bayonetta, but I hated her because I couldn't be her. But why can't I be her? I mean, I can be anything I put my mind to, right? Well, Bayonetta's got one big difference from me, and it's not the fact that she does backflips or the fact that she's 8 feet tall or the fact that she casts black magic. It's the fact that she's a woman, and I'm a man, and Bayonetta, as a man, doesn't have nearly the same sexual agency or potency, the affective potency that she does as a woman. The idea of the reclaimed sexuality, I think, is key here. So that was it for me. That was game over. I just don't get to be her no matter how hard I try. But why is that even the case, really? Well, part of this comes down to the way that we talk about our bodies, this disparity between the masculine and feminine and this very gendered archetype. As Judith Butler tells us in Bodies That Matter, our bodies are indissociable from the discourse that surrounds them. We aren't able to separate ourselves from the culture that we're within, and that will always impact our reading, or our reading of others' bodies. So my little brother, knowing this, would say that language is the core of our self-definition, and that in order to change the way we think about ourselves, we have to change the way we talk about ourselves too. So for him, this means no race, no gender, no sexuality, no labels whatsoever. But as we know now that this really has its limits. Labels actually serve a really important social function for us. They act as this mobilizing force. I mean, where would pride be today if people like me weren't originally termed with a contrary sexual feeling or later diagnosed with sexual inversion? Where would queer rights be without the word queer? As we take these... What happened?
Yay!
Okay. As we take these really significant social movements and we turn them into movements that are about everybody instead of highlighting the difference, we begin to take really diverse groups of people and we homogenize them. We make them indissociable from one another, and when we do this, we lose the ability to acknowledge social injustices that might apply to one group but not another. So my brother actually comes from a really good place. He is trying to find that middle ground between the masculine and feminine, the neutral thing that gets to the core of the human experience. This is the kind of equality that he's striving for, but equality in this sense is in a lot of ways an illusion. I mean, equal with what? If you walk down the clothing aisle, look at the women's section, for example, you see the dresses and the skirts. If you walk down the men's section, you see shirts and pants, but if you walk down the unisex section, it's more shirts and pants. Our gender neutral, our idea of gender neutral is inherently gendered. And so anything that is gender neutral is just anything that's decidedly unfeminine. So this means that even if we put a masculine body in a feminine form, it becomes impossible to treat it in the same way because our culture has this ingrained idea of what makes these bodies what they are. So in this image taken by Linda Nochlin, in which she reproduces an old French photograph from a magazine, shows that even a similar contextualization of the body cannot yield the same sort of reception, cannot yield the same perception of it. Even as we get to more, I guess, similar contextual forms, Prince Crom here cannot be read in the same way as the other figure can. It's impossible simply by virtue of him being a man that we don't see him in the same way. So what's the solution to this then? Well, I think it has something to do with the idea of reimagining. When we make games, when we make any sort of complex fictions, whether it's in novels or through films or whatnot, anything that requires this world building, we create these miniature universes that kind of separate themselves from our universe through what we put into it. Everything that's different isolates it from ours. But in turn, it's able to feed back into our culture, as any form of media would, like photography or video work, for example. All of this can help reconstruct our ideas of things. So reimagination deals in hypotheticals. What if I was able to be Bayonetta? What if I could impact the world? What if I was able to fundamentally change how our culture works? Well, I don't think that we should take the well-trodden path of the technically sexless but conspicuously sexed species as the Solarian builders too, although I love builders too, don't get me wrong. Or the Azari, the sexy lady aliens who still are there for that male gaze. And even though games like this are really fantastic, I don't think that this kind of highlighting or exaggeration necessarily does this reconstruction that reimagination attempts to look for. When we reimagine gender, I think we look more at the way we inhabit our bodies. So whether it's through a kind of gender ambiguous character creation, or whether through simply imagining a new method of existence through our bodies, it's through these options of reimagination that we can come to deconstruct our views of gender and then reconfigure it to a way that more benefits a larger group of people. So I would suggest that we reimagine everything, and this is my plea to all the game makers in the room, that we reimagine what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, what it means to be in that neutral ground or something out there. Reimagine everything, reimagine feminine worlds, and reimagine maybe what it's like for a man to just be a part of them. And maybe if we just all reimagine just enough, then I too might get a chance at being sexy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have another presenter and another time to set up technology. So 1 more minute.
Is the audio like just go on? Cool.
All right, so up now we have Nicole Pacampera of Team Sagittarius, representing her team. Team Sagittarius is a Montreal, Toronto-based collective consisting of Hope Aaron Phillips, Raul Olo, Nicole Pacampera, coming from a wide range of backgrounds, from intermedia cyber arts, film and animation to psychology. They all met last summer at a gaming incubator in Montreal, and yes, they're all definitely Sagittarius.
Alright. So I'm Nicole, and today we'll be talking about a game that we made called We Are Fine, We'll Be Fine. And these are my two wonderful teammates, Hope and Raul, and they're not here right now, but they're watching, so hello. And the image that you see on the side is actually where our game title came from. It was just like this mantra that we were saying all through the summer last year just to kind of survive. And so today we'll be talking about the game, and essentially it's this wooden game board that explores people's personal stories about marginalization and oppression. And so the way it works is that by touching the board and holding another player's hand, you activate these audio stories that recount people's experiences of feeling marginalized. And so different hand-holding combinations, like holding another player's hand or having everybody hold each other's hands, that will activate different stories. And so our game is mostly an audio documentary, but it's delivered in a non-traditional way. So what we're basically doing is we're using ourselves and our bodies as interfaces to play these stories. And so to just give you a preview, here's a trailer that I can play right now.
I mean, the one I get all the time is kind of like, oh, where are you from? And like,
Have you always been here?
And the implication there is, well, you can't be from here, so where are you from? And that question used to always really throw me out.
So that's our game and how it works, and whenever we show it around and talk to it about with other people, we sometimes describe it as a kind of sad twister. But really, but really I think, where this game comes from, it's born out of a lot of our own experiences. and the things that we've had to go through in our lives. And more specifically, I think it was really triggered and motivated by a lot of the experiences that we had last summer. So to just give you a bit of context, all three of us met at a gaming incubator last year. And this gaming incubator was this 10-week full-time program that was with 16 other people. And we were essentially making games all summer long. But I think for us, we found the incubator a bit problematic, just because there was a lot of tension and a lot of division between participants. And we really experienced a lot of issues like microaggressions and issues of racism and sexism and ableism and all of these issues. And it was just really hard and just emotionally taxing to have to experience all these things on a recurring basis. So I think, what this game kind of became, it became this therapeutic tool, a way for us as creators to kind of wrestle and process a lot of the emotional trauma that we were going through that summer. But it wasn't only that summer, it was also our entire lives. And so this game, it transformed into this physical manifestation of our pain. And it wasn't just our pain, but it was also, the pain of other marginalized folks. Because in the end, we interviewed over 20 individuals, and we accumulated over 7 hours of audio. And so that's a lot of feelings, and a lot of emotions, and a lot of people just sharing their own experiences of struggle. And so for us, that was really the most important process of this entire thing. Because what we really wanted to do was just create these conversations and just provide the space where we could have people like us, marginalized folks, who could really honestly talk about these issues and, in the best way that we knew how, which was in our own stories and in our own words. And so when we were thinking about this game and thinking about developing it, we were like, what's the best way that we could deliver this in a way that doesn't belittle or trivialize these experiences? Because sometimes that's kind of the risk when you're creating a game-based environment. And so when we were thinking about this, we were looking at a lot of empathy games and games for social change. And I think a lot of the things that we started noticing was that for some of these games, they kind of put the player in this position where the game is explaining to them what it feels like to be in that situation, or what it feels like to be in those shoes. And that's totally fine, that's acceptable. But for us, when we were seeing this, the question that kept popping into our heads was like, what about us? What about the people who have experienced these things and who know fully well what it means to be in those shoes? And our question was, how can we use games, not just as a way to educate and to explain, but also as a way to kind of, help us and to help us heal, to help us empower, and to just help us in some ways, right? So we were really struggling with these themes and just trying to figure out, okay, what's the best approach to this? Because that's a really tough thing to figure out, right? And so for us, I think we knew that what we didn't want to do was to have this kind of oppression 101 kind of deal. We knew that we weren't going to explain why certain experiences were examples of marginalization. Because I think it was Jen yesterday was telling the keynote, that wasn't our default gaze. What we wanted to do was bring it back to the marginalized folk. And I think the best example of this is one of our approaches for editing this particular clip I'm going to play. And so I'll play it right now. You can listen to it.
I guess the first memory I have being wow, this is really scary, or this is a very racist area, was we moved into the house and we dropped off our stuff. I think we cleaned a bit or something, and then we were gonna have dinner, and this was the first night in our house, and we went to a Chinese restaurant in 10-minute drive away from our house, and everyone was white.
So this editing is really abrupt, and it doesn't really explain, and she continues the story in a later clip, but for this particular instance, it was just really at that comment, and it just stops. And that was a really deliberate process for us, because I think that's just, an example of recentering the gaze back on the marginalized folk. And if you've been through this situation, you kind of understand why she might be feeling that way, and you can kind of get a better sense of why. And but if not, maybe it's confusing, or you don't really understand why. But our game isn't really to explain to you why. It's just, I don't know, you just have to think about it more and figure it out. Yeah. And so when we were, when we had that, that was how the direction of the game came about. And when we had that, we knew that at the base of this game, at the core of this game, we really had these powerful stories. And that was the central theme of the whole game. And we knew that, we couldn't just have regular buttons or regular controllers, because it felt like it would be kind of, it would diminish the strength of these stories. And what we needed was to find some kind of meaningful interaction to be as meaningful and as powerful as these stories themselves. And so we were thinking about this, and we're like, what's the best way to deliver this? And we were like, okay, well, let's say you have like an intimate conversation with other people, What are the ways and what are the actions in which you kind of feel like, okay, someone is listening to you, or someone is like just being supportive, and someone is just there for you. And we were thinking about that, and we're like, okay, well, what are the gestures that are involved with that? And we're like, okay, well, if someone holds my hand, or if someone puts up, their hand on my shoulder, or someone just hugs me, that feels really comforting, and I feel like, that other person is really listening to me. And so when we were looking at all these gestures, we're like, okay, well, that seems like a lot of these gestures, they revolve around the gesture of touch and of human contact and connectedness. And for us, we really wanted to play with that, that kind of interaction, because it felt like, you're kind of introducing its own set of language, kind of, because I think, in our culture, touch is really closely connected with intimacy, with connectiveness, and if you can introduce that to your game somewhat, it felt like it could tie in with the kind of message that we were trying to do, which was like the sense of connectedness. So I think that's why we really focus on that touch mechanic. And so we were thinking about that, and we're like, okay, well, there's this bus shelter in Montreal where there's a heater on top of the bus shelter, and the only way to turn it on was for an ad, was to touch a button on one end, and another person had to touch another button on one end, and if they had had skin-to-skin contact, turn on the heater. And that's really mean during Montreal winters. I don't know why they did that, but we were thinking about that, and we're like, oh, okay, why don't we play with that idea? Why don't we kind of integrate that with our game? So we're like, well, what if we have this kind of Ouija board where you're kind of summoning up these really sad stories just by touching the board and holding another player's hand. And so when we had that idea, we're like, oh, that's it. That's the meaningful interaction that we really want to do. Because, when you're holding hands with people, it just feels like you're giving the sense of okay, we're working together as a group, and we're just giving each other that kind of collaboration and that kind of trust. So that's how we ended up with that. And I think for us, that touch interaction really added this other layer to our game, and it felt like it added more complexity rather than if we just had regular buttons, because I think it emphasized a lot of the themes that our game was trying to do. Because I think as a marginalized individual, when you're going through these experiences, sometimes it can really feel lonely if you don't know anyone who's going through those experiences, right? So for us, what helped last summer was when we had a group of people that we could just really lean onto, and they became a kind of life raft. So for us, we really wanted to kind of bring that into the game, and kind of mimic that kind of experience. So by holding each other's hands, and we're basically forcing people to keep holding hands for 10 to 15 minutes to go through the whole game. So it's kind of this shared responsibility between each of us, each of the players, just keep going through that whole narrative experience. And even though, when you play this game as a player, it's really kind of passive. All you can really do is listen to the stories and just hold hands. But really, we did that on purpose because we just wanted people to just, listen to these stories and that be the main thing. But at the same time, just having the hand holding thing, it's kind of this other layer of narrative that you're kind of, even though it's an intimate experience with you, it's just an individual experience and you're not talking to your other players, it's it's this shared bonding experience with everyone. And it's they're also there with you going through the story. And what's so interesting is that sometimes we'd have strangers, playing it, and in the beginning, they kind of not really want to touch it. They're I don't want to hold your hand. But like as they go through it, and it, you know, they kind of descend into this like internal zone where they're like really reflective. You know, that kind of like not really wanting to touch somewhere, it's like it kind of just disappears. And then as they go into center and stuff, you know, in the end, it's like they've bonded in some ways, right? And so that's really interesting to see for us. And so I think, you know, looking back at this experience, I think for all of us and the people that we interviewed, although what you see is like the final game and, you know, it's meant to be played, I think that's just like the tip of, I don't know, the whole aspect of this entire thing. I think for a lot of us, it was really the process in making that, because it was really like a cathartic process to just like, you know, deal with all these things. And I think for all of us, you know, experiences, and that we can find strength in each other as well as with each other. Thanks, fellas. And to help those who may be experiencing some similar things. And I think, you know, when we say we are fine, we'll be fine, we're not saying that these issues and these problems are okay, because like, no, they're not. But what we are trying to say is this kind of, you know, this rallying cry and this kind of mantra to kind of, you know, remind ourselves and to pump ourselves up and to say, you know what, after everything that we've been through, after all of that pain and suffering, we're still here and we've survived and we are fine and we'll be fine. And so, you know, I think for us, you know, the message that we really want to say is that, you know, at the end of the day, despite what everyone wants us to believe, we're not alone in these experiences, and that we can find strength in each other as well as with each other. Thanks.
Thank you again to all the speakers. I'd like to invite you three up here, and we can do some Q&A. Just pull up these chairs. I mean, you can stand if you want to. I feel like sitting will be more fun. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, for you, what's one, two really common forms of femme erasure that individuals can watch out for in their own behavior? Like ways.
Like in what way do people erase femmes?
Like what behaviors one can look out for in oneself to try and check?
Okay. So you can make linguistic changes that will slowly change the ways that you think. So, for example, instead of saying, I saw this woman the other day, you can say, I saw this person who I read as feminine the other day. And not the person who presented feminine, because, you know, if I'm a femme and I'm wearing overalls and a plaid shirt, I'm wearing femme clothes, right? So just taking ownership over your language is a good way to do that.
That's interesting in just like acknowledging the fallibility in your perception of others. I think that, that though you may perceive them as such, it's not necessarily how they are presenting themselves.
Yeah, like don't assign gender labels to other people. It's a good way to avoid it.
More questions? I don't know how to like word this out, but it's for both of you.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about, okay, number one, first off, I agree with you completely in everything you said about Beta. I'll let somebody else think the way I do about Beta, because like that perfectly explained that. But you're talking about these ideas of like reimagining gender and especially like the female form and like what we consider as like feminine and female and sexy versus how that relates to like masculinity and femininity and ideas of gender. And yeah. But I was wondering is like where do we end up fitting like femme within these reimaginings of gender? Like does femme still like do these like versions of soft strength like still exist within these reimaginings? Does femininity as a concept even still like exist at all, or is it like a totally new meaning for what that is? Am I making sense?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay.
I feel like we've all asked these questions before.
Yeah.
These are like, yeah,
So
common concerns.
I like to distinguish between like I guess like a strong versus a weak reimagination. What we see a lot of times in like popular culture is this kind of weak reimagination where the inversals or the things that are reimagined are just like very much at the surface level. When I talk about reimagination, I'm more looking at the stronger, like looking at the foundational principles that make our society and basically following up in that construction all the way to the top. So that might mean that femmes don't exist, depending on how you reimagine the world. Or it might mean they just exist within a different context. So I think it really depends on the person who's doing the world building as to what kind of things are evident in their world.
As for, do you have any ideas of what Sagittarius might do next? Is it like going to be more emotional intimacy kind of, or like, I don't know, pain based? Is that the theme of your company? Well, I think like for this project, our experience with it is that we have like a kind of love-hate relationship with it because it reminds us so much of what we went through last summer. So I think the next game that we really want to do is a really gamey game where it's kind of like that, but then you're just making music but making hands, and I feel like, you know, that might be fun.
Just like more.
Yeah, it's just more like that. Yeah.
More questions?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So how much time do we have?
I think we have like 10 minutes.
Okay, we have lots of time. I have a question for you, Nicole.
Sure.
So have you thought about like ways to use this like touch mechanic for social change on a larger scale? I know that sounds like a really big question.
I think like when we were making this, we're like, you know, the theme of like oppression and marginalization, that's like a really big topic that's complex, and it's really hard to tackle that in just like one game.
Yeah.
So it's tough, but I guess you can try. I mean, that's all we can do, right? But what do you mean by like, if we can have more touch base?
Like, for example, I come from a philosophy background, and there's a lot of discussion about moving learning online, blah, 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 blah. And like one thing that I've always said is that's going to be tough to do with philosophy because part of not being a jerk means looking people in the eye, and you have to not be a jerk when you're talking about ethics. And so like when I was TAing in philosophy, I would make people hold hands all the time. All the time. They hated it, but then I baked them cookies and it worked out okay. But like if you disagreed with someone, like sit down, hold hands, talk about it. It's hard to be a jerk when you're holding hands with someone.
I think so.
And so, yeah, it can be used as like a teaching tool, I guess, and like you were using it as a self-discovery tool, and it's interesting to like make something so intimate, so technological.
Well, I think touch itself, right? It's like you're kind of like really. It's like, you know. I know. So can I like?
Yeah. No,
it's like if I do that, it's just. It feels like it's harder to be mean to you because I don't know. It's just a touch, right? It's like there's like some history behind that kind of interaction. So it's like when you bring that into a game or you bring it to any other like setting like that, it kind of. You know, you tap into that kind of like pre-established feelings, right? Does that make sense?
What about instances? I mean, touch is so powerful, as both of you were talking about, but it's not for everybody, right? You have to have like good permission in order to touch other people. I wonder how maybe you come up with that against that in your game. You say some people don't like it at first, and so do other people say no and just walk away?
Yes. So like they would play it, and then if like they would play it and the content wouldn't be like exactly what they wanted or just a touch thing. And I think just saying it up front that, okay, this really requires like a lot of touch. It's like the entire premise of the game is just holding hands. So if you're not comfortable with that, well, you know, that's totally fine. And I think it's just giving that people the option. You're not like forcing them that you have to play this game and touch it. Because, you know, like your audience, you know, just if anyone wants to play it, then they can play it. And that's it.
I wonder if you could use like a substitute, like something that you both touch. So your hands are close but not touching.
Yeah, maybe like a board reconfiguration or something.
Do you have more questions? More questions from the for each other? I have a lot of questions. But I'll ask one in particular. Nicole, you know, you talk about healing a lot in your presentation, which I think is really interesting. How do you measure that? How do you measure that in terms of your own personal experiences based on making it? Did it change you? Did it make you see different things differently? What about the responses from people? Have they been in line with maybe what you set out to do?
Well, I think that I did all the interviews for this thing, and I think initially, you know, in the beginning, I was just like, okay, I've met one thing, like it's okay, yeah, whatever. But like, you know, just talking to people about these things and just giving them the space. I don't know, for some reason, it kind of helps you deal with your own emotions, and it's really hard to measure. I don't know, it's really hard to measure. Okay, how less am I painful now because of this experience than before? But it felt really, I think for all of us, it just felt really healing to just go through that experience. And like the people that we interviewed, you know, we've had like these, you know, at the end of their interviews, some of them were like crying, and it just felt like it was just a way for them to talk about these things. Because I think someone mentioned like you wouldn't talk about these things in a coffee conversation, you know, like you wouldn't be like, so what's your experience of marginalization in your life, and like what is really painful, you know, that's not a regular conversation. But I think for them it was this like a refreshing thing to just honestly talk about these stuff.
I was wondering, like, how did it work as a public game? Like, that the game there and people playing it and people around seeing it. Like, how did that change how people are playing and how they perceive the game? Did you talk to these people?
Sure. So initially, like how we set up the game was we put it like in the secluded corner because we wanted it to be like an intimate experience between the three people. And if you're seeing the game like from the outside, it's kind of like odd because these people are just like, it's not doing anything and they're just like holding like that. And you're like, what is happening there, you know? So like we would be there like in other like exhibits and stuff, we would be there and to just explain. But really for us, what we wanted to do was to have it more intimate, to have it more like for the people that are actually playing it. So it's like, I think one of our ideas was just, okay, would we do audio, like a headphone versus like a speaker? And we're like, well, you know, because we'd have like lineups because it's like only 3 people can play. But we're like, well, if it's a speaker, then it kind of defeats that intimacy, right? And then everyone else in the line kind of knows, because we only have 2 sets, kind of knows the same story, so they'd be like, well, I played this already, I don't really want to play it anymore. So that's why it's more like an intimate setting.
Well, you were talking about how last year, like last summer, you were talking with all your group, and that helped you. But then your game is really passive, as you said, and it's just like holding hands and hearing. Would you like to do it so that you can also talk about your problems? Because I don't think that if you're with a stranger is like, oh yeah, I don't like this happened to me, this is really hard, then would you want something like that too?
I think so. Like definitely, I think one of the things, like we weren't really sure how to integrate that in the game because we had like really like short time frame to do it. But one of the things that our idea is that if it's made into a kind of workshop where people are able to make these games themselves and they know how to make it, because then you would get into that creating process where you can interview people and you can really talk to them. And a lot of the people that we interviewed, because of our time constraints, were people that we knew. So it was kind of revealing this aspect of the people that we knew that we didn't actually know before, because it was them just talking about it, right? So I don't know, does that answer your question?
I have a question for Paolino. So you're an artist, you are making stuff. I wonder, what are some examples? I'd love to hear about your work about how you brought in reimagining gender into your work.
Well, one of my recent works I've been developing, and it's what I'm going to continue developing as part of my research grant, is a game that I've been producing, like a tabletop game. I'm attempting to really interrogate like the given structures in the traditional fantasy setting. And so this involves a lot of like world building culturally, and it's on a very vast scale, and it's hard to make something so expansive but also very believable and very intimate to people. So some of the challenges I've faced, I think, primarily deal with I primarily deal with philosophical questions when I design options for the player, like the different races and things all have some sort of existentialism about them that I feel like makes them more interesting and kind of poses these questions to the player. So in the idea of reimagining, I definitely look at the way cultures can be greatly impacted by historical and historical intersections with other cultures, and the way that impacts their perceptions of self and perceptions of others as well. And so I think that's like primarily what I'm looking at right now.
Final questions? Okay, thank you so much. I think now it's a coffee break time, and then we'll come back for more.
Good job.
High five,
Me?
Yeah.
Change this.
Oh no!
Celebrate this coffee.